George and Lila Watkins were the kind of neighbors everyone admired: charming, generous, and always the first to lend a helping hand. But when the body of their long-missing neighbor, Alan Myers, was unearthed beneath their garden shed, the perfect image shattered and the truth about what really happened on their quiet suburban street stunned the entire community. Mason Ridge had always been the kind of neighborhood where people left their doors unlocked and waved at each other from freshly mowed lawns. Children played in the streets until sunset, and block parties were a regular tradition every summer. Life moved slowly and quietly. There, a bubble of comfort far from the chaos of city life. That's why, when flashing blue lights lit up the cul-de-sac one Thursday morning, the entire neighborhood froze. Something was wrong, not just unusual, deeply, horribly wrong. The house at 40 to Cedar Lane, belonging to George and Lila Watkins, was suddenly surrounded by police vehicles. Officers moved with precision, laying down bright yellow tape around the backyard and quietly speaking to each other. Residents peeked from behind curtains, mouths parted in disbelief. George and Lila were the golden couple of the street: warm smiles, friendly waves, the hosts of every 4th of July barbecue. George coached youth baseball. Lila baked for every school fundraiser. Their son, Connor, a quiet teenager, rarely drew any attention. They were the kind of family that made others feel proud to live next door. No one knew what the police were looking for, but word spread quickly that a body had been found beneath the garden shed. Not just any body. Someone who used to live on that very street. Alan Myers. The name alone sent chills through those who remembered. He had disappeared 6 years ago without a trace. One day he was tending his roses, the next his house sat empty, his mail piling up and his car collecting dust in the driveway. Police had searched for him back then, asked questions, knocked on doors, but nothing had come of it. Eventually, the house was sold, the investigation faded, and Alan became a quiet mystery. Now, that mystery had resurfaced, right in the Watkins backyard. Forensics teams combed the scene. A blue tarp covered something behind the shed. As investigators moved with careful urgency, cameras flashed, reporters gathered at the end of the street, and the neighborhood's sense of safety evaporated. The discovery of Alan's body was more than shocking, it was personal. The kind of secret that rewrote everything the neighbors thought they knew about the people who lived among them. And it was only the beginning. Alan Myers had once been a familiar face on every street in Mason Ridge. A retired postal worker, he spent his days walking the neighborhood with a thermos in hand, waving at joggers and stopping to chat with dog walkers. He lived alone, but his cheerful personality made him a part of everyone's routine. It was impossible to ignore Alan. That's why his sudden disappearance had felt like a crack forming in the picture-perfect surface of the neighborhood. He vanished on a quiet Tuesday in April, 6 years before the discovery behind the Watkins shed. His house was found untouched, his bed made, and his wallet and keys missing. Nothing was stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. A neighbor noticed Alan hadn't picked up his newspaper. Then another mentioned they hadn't seen him on his usual afternoon walk. Soon, the police were called. A missing persons report was filed, and for a while, Mason Ridge buzzed with concern and suspicion. Volunteers combed the parks and wooded trails surrounding the neighborhood. Flyers went up at gas stations and libraries. Alan's sister flew in from another state, pleading for help in front of local news cameras. She stayed for weeks, desperate for answers. The Watkins family was among those who helped. George offered to organize a search team, and Lila brought food for the volunteers. Their support seemed genuine, almost heartfelt. No one suspected anything more. As time passed and leads dried up, the urgency faded. The police moved on to other cases, and the neighborhood settled back into its normal rhythm. Alan's house was eventually sold, repainted, and rented out to a new family. People still remembered Alan, but over time he became more of a legend than a real person, a cautionary tale whispered at backyard parties. Now, with Alan's remains unearthed beneath the shed, everything was being reevaluated. Detectives began re-examining the original case file. They noticed inconsistencies in the timeline, odd gaps in statements, and one particularly troubling fact. The Watkins shed had been built exactly 2 weeks after Alan vanished. No permit had been filed, and no contractor listed. George had told neighbors he built it himself during a long weekend, claiming it was for gardening tools. No one questioned it then. But now, that same shed was the center of a murder investigation, and what seemed like random details in the past were suddenly taking on chilling new meaning. The shed behind 40 to Cedar Lane was more than just a backyard structure, it was a carefully crafted cover-up. After the discovery of Alan Myers' remains beneath it, forensic experts began a full excavation. The concrete slab was broken apart, and soil samples were collected. Beneath layers of dirt, they found remnants of an old tarp, weathered rope, and pieces of a decomposed backpack containing personal belongings. There were no signs of animal activity, no indications that the burial had been accidental or rushed. Everything about the scene felt methodical, intentional. Meanwhile, investigators began digging into George Watkins' past. He had worked as a financial advisor for over 2 decades at a respected investment firm downtown. Records showed Alan had once been one of his clients. The timing raised immediate red flags. 6 weeks before Alan disappeared, he had filed a complaint with the firm, expressing concerns about irregularities in his retirement portfolio. Internal emails revealed that the complaint was assigned directly to George, but there was no record of any follow-up. The entire file had vanished from the system shortly after Alan's disappearance. At the same time, credit card statements unearthed another twist. George had purchased construction supplies, concrete, pressure-treated lumber, and sealant just days after the missing persons case had been opened. These were the exact materials used to build the shed. He had made the purchases in cash and stored the receipts in an unlabeled envelope at the back of his filing cabinet. Investigators interpreted this as an attempt to avoid a paper trail. Attention then turned to Lila Watkins. Bank activity revealed she had withdrawn a large sum of money from a joint account around the same time. A neighbor recalled seeing her return from the hardware store with bags in hand. At the time, no one thought twice. Lila was known for gardening, always tending to her plants and flowers with care. But now, her actions looked less like innocent errands and more like steps in a cover-up. Despite the growing mountain of circumstantial evidence, George and Lila maintained their innocence. George insisted he had nothing to hide and claimed the complaint from Alan had been a misunderstanding. Lila said she remembered Alan being friendly and had no knowledge of any conflict. But the evidence was painting a different picture, one where the disappearance wasn't random at all, but calculated and executed by people no one ever suspected. As the investigation deepened, police turned their attention to the Watkins home itself. With a search warrant in hand, forensic teams combed through every room, every closet, and every drawer. The house was immaculate, but too immaculate, almost as if it had been scrubbed of history. In the basement, behind a wall of paint cans and cleaning supplies, they found something chilling, a concealed door leading to a hidden space no larger than a walk-in closet. The room had no windows, just a single overhead light and shelves lined with neatly stacked notebooks, maps, and photographs. Each notebook was filled with handwritten entries. They weren't journals or lists, but logs, daily observations about the neighbors on Cedar Lane. Names, routines, car models, times people came and went. There were maps with lines drawn between houses, and even sketches of the neighborhood from different vantage points. One notebook focused almost entirely on Alan Myers. It documented when Alan walked his dog, who visited his house, and when lights in his windows turned on and off. One entry stood out. It was dated just days before his disappearance and read, "Alan knows. He's watching too. Don't let him talk." On a shelf nearby sat a box containing personal items that belonged to Alan: his watch, house key, and even a dog tag from his pet, who had died shortly after Alan vanished. The presence of these items confirmed that Alan had not just disappeared, he had been stalked, silenced, and buried by someone who had kept a record of it. Technology experts recovered footage from an old hard drive connected to the surveillance system. It appeared to be security footage from the Watkins' backyard, but oddly, it wasn't facing outward, it was pointing toward their own shed. The camera was motion-triggered, and on one particular night, just hours after Alan's disappearance, a faint shadow was captured near the shed's foundation. The timestamp matched the night of Alan's last known sighting. This discovery changed the tone of the investigation. It wasn't just a crime of passion or a spontaneous act, it was planned. Every move, every step was recorded, documented, and hidden behind a polished suburban mask. Detectives now believe that George and possibly Lila had gone to great lengths to erase Alan Myers, not just from the neighborhood, but from memory. Yet one question still remained unanswered: why had they kept everything? And who, if anyone, else knew the truth? Months passed as the case against George and Lila Watkins unfolded, capturing national media attention. Prosecutors built a compelling narrative. Alan Myers had uncovered fraud in his investment account and attempted to expose it. George, fearing personal and professional ruin, eliminated the threat and buried it beneath the very ground he walked on every day. Lila, either out of loyalty or fear, helped cover it up. But while the evidence was strong, there was still no definitive proof of who had struck the fatal blow. The trial was scheduled to begin in the fall, but it never made it that far. In a development that stunned everyone, Connor Watkins, now 19, walked into the local police station one early morning and asked to speak with a detective. Quiet and withdrawn for most of his life, Connor had kept something buried for years. Now, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, he was ready to talk. What he said reframed the entire investigation. 6 years earlier, Connor had come home from school and overheard a heated conversation in the backyard. Alan had confronted George about missing funds and threatened to go public. The shouting grew louder until it was followed by a loud, sudden thud. Peeking through the blinds, Connor saw Alan lying motionless on the ground. George stood over him in shock, holding a broken garden spade. Within minutes, Lila joined them, and the three disappeared into the darkness behind the shed. Connor didn't fully understand what he had seen. His parents told him it was an accident, that it wasn't his concern. They made him promise to never speak about it again. Now, years later, Connor couldn't keep the secret anymore. His statement aligned with the timeline, the physical evidence, and the surveillance footage. George was arrested again, this time charged with manslaughter and obstruction of justice. He eventually accepted a plea deal, admitting to striking Alan during the altercation and orchestrating the burial with Lila's help. Lila was convicted on lesser charges but spared prison time. Connor was placed under protective supervision while the media storm faded. Mason Ridge was never the same. The Watkins home stood empty, its paint peeling and windows boarded. A small plaque for Alan Myers was placed near the community park bench where he used to sit. People still walked their dogs and trimmed their hedges, but something was different now, an invisible weight that reminded everyone that beneath even the quietest streets, terrible secrets can lie hidden for years.